together to try and understand how time and money and energy and relationships can all get us what we want out of life. And what we want more than anything over these last 2 years is to get together and celebrate our opportunities to make the world a better place. This past couple of weeks, I had an opportunity to participate in my first Latin dance party down in Costa Rica, and it's nice to know that we can start to feel a little bit more comfortable about getting out and being with other people. We opened this space in January of 2020, and it immediately had very little relevance for the next year and a half. And so this series of speakers on resiliency, I think is very apropos. I want to introduce you to Kelly Hall. She's going to be our moderator and questioner, interrogator, and the victim is going to be Erin Little. Erin is a photographer. She used to blog. She's got a tremendous following of people who are interested in what she has to say, and I'm interested in what she has to say. Kelly's interested in what she has to say. Kelly's going to get her to say what she wants her to say. Kelly Hall is our personal trainer. She works in this space. She helps Tim and Jennifer and Nate and I stay in shape so that we have the energy to go out and do the work that we do in the world. My name is Tom Shepard. I own Shepard Financial. It's just one of the establishments that's here in the Currency Institute. We also have Sea Change Yoga. Kelly's got an office here. And I'm just excited that we have the opportunity to open ourselves up, bring in interesting speakers to talk about resiliency, and share the space that we created 2 years ago for this very purpose. So thank you all for coming. And with that, I'll turn this back over to Kelly, and we're on our way for just like the second time in 2 years. So excited.
Me too. Thank you, Tom. I'm so excited to have Erin here. I actually didn't know who she was before we asked her to speak here. And so months ago, Erin and I got together. I was like, let's just go and like we can get to know each other, kind of see what we're about. So we went for this walk, and it was like, we were just like chit-chatting the whole time, and I was like, I just got a friend. So
she's also a really fast walker, and I'm shorter. And I was like, okay, I'm here.
This is the first I'm hearing of this, so feel free to tell me to slow down next time. Because I have a friend who's taller, I know.
It was good exercise. It was all good.
See what I mean? So there's a really great rapport here. And so I couldn't be more excited for this because I feel like we're just going to do our thing here and hopefully share some insights with all of you that will help you be more resilient in your life. And after Erin and I do our question and answer, I'll open it up to you guys so that if you have some questions for her, you can ask her as well. So I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you.
Mine wasn't on all time.
I have note cards because I'm very prepared. And firstly, I'd like to ask for a little audience participation, if you will. I would love for you to raise your hand and keep it raised if you have experienced one of the following throughout your life: a loss of any kind, a breakup or a divorce, anyone who's been bullied or threatened, anyone who's struggled with infertility, miscarriage, pregnancy loss. Oh, keep your hands up with any of all of you. And lastly, anyone who had been touched by mental illness or physical disability with themselves or in their family. So if you look around the room, minus this young one here, like most people have their hands up. And the point is, life has its ups and downs. We all struggle with the same types of things. Some are just more open about them and more vulnerable than others. But the reality is that this is life. Now, resiliency is the capacity to recover quickly from these difficulties. So I really hadn't thought much about resiliency before this talk, and honestly, when they first asked me, I was like, did you have the right person? Or you mean me? Like, why would you want? I'm just like the average Joe. Like, why am I talking about this? But, you know, the word resiliency has been thrown at me a lot, and I've never really stopped to think about it in my life because it's just kind of who I am, I guess. I don't, you know, it's not something that I'm like, I must be resilient. But I never really stopped to think about what resiliency actually is. And so I did a lot of research in preparation for this because I thought, like, well, I'll just like figure out what is resiliency and what characteristics do resilient people have in common. So it turns out there's a number of them, depending on where you read, but 4 of them really resonated with me, and I felt that they might be helpful for you and anyone who's, oh, I forgot my Instagram Live. Do you want to set that up? Yeah. Sorry, Instagram. So anyway, there's 4 that I think would be really helpful for people to kind of learn. 1606. I'm going to change that after. That's good. Okay. Hi, sorry, I forgot to log in. So anyway, so I'd like to just like briefly go over just 4 of the things that I think are important in resiliency. One is resilient people accept that terrible things happen in life. And what I would like to bring back is that you all had your hands raised, right? So what we'll get into at some point, I'm sure, is social media and how we're constantly bombarded with this image of perfection in other people. And it's like, oh, like everyone else has this perfect life and they're not struggling. And so when you're going through something that we all go through, whether it's a breakup or a loss of some sort, and you are just constantly looking at all of these perfect people's lives out there on social media, you start to judge yourself and you start to doubt yourself. And you start to think, there must be something wrong with me because I'm struggling right now, but everybody else seems to be fine. Maybe I'm not good enough, whatever it is. But resilient people accept that some days are bad, some days are good. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out. Number 2, resilient people are careful where they put their energy. They're very self-aware. I'm self-aware kind of to a fault. Sometimes I think it is not all positive, but I'm constantly questioning where I put my energy and whether or not this choice is going to be good for me or this choice is going to be bad for me. I also hold myself accountable for all choices, behaviors, actions that I engage in. So that's another thing that I think is important. Number 3 is much like number 1, but resilient people are very realistic. So when faced with stress, they stay calm, clear, and make concise choices balancing optimism and pessimism. So I wanted to just tell a quick personal story when it comes to this, the optimism versus pessimism thing. So I recently had a health scare where I didn't know if I had cancer or not, and I spent a little over a month having to wait for these results. And in that month, I had many people tell me, just think positively, you'll be fine. And then when I started to weigh both options of, well, you know what, the results are either going to be good or they're going to be bad. And I have to consider both equally. I have to go into this being fully prepared because there are steps that I need to take in my life to be able to cope with the fact that if it's negative news, I've got this. I'm not going to be knocked off my feet. But it's interesting that a lot of people in my life saw that as me really focusing on the negative when I wasn't doing that, and that's not what I was doing. I was considering it a valid option just as much as the good news, you know, and I wanted to be prepared. So upon reading about resiliency in people, this is a characteristic that apparently is common, and I think has served me well over the years, because I'm never like blindsided by something, and I'm always prepared, and I consider all possibilities equally. So, and then the last one, which is super important, and the one that I probably relate to the most, is motivation. I'm very driven. I have been my whole life, and this is kind of another thing about resiliency. Is it nature or nurture? And I feel like I was born with an amount of resiliency, and then you experience childhood trauma, and you grow more resiliency because you're just trying to survive, right? But I think motivation, I think I was just born with that part. But resilient people have a lot of motivation, and despite setbacks, stress, exhaustion, depression, they don't give up. and they don't accept failure as an option. And I think that that's really important. So no matter where I found myself in life, the lowest of lows, I'm like, I don't accept this. I want more. So that keeps you fighting. So that's my little spiel on resiliency. I hope that was helpful. Now I can put my note cards down. Kelly can take over.
So I have a couple thoughts. So when you and I sat down to talk, you kind of elaborated on your childhood, some of the traumas that you're speaking of. And as you're sitting here, you're talking about all the ways you've been resilient, but you and I both know that that doesn't mean there aren't moments where you are stalled, right? Where you are sitting there like, I don't know what to do, or this is too much and I can't move forward right now, right? So one of the things you told me about, which this is new, that we're going to talk about this publicly, right?
Oh,
Sure. Is that she developed an eating disorder as a child, right? So it's like, technically, you're being resilient, right? You're surviving these moments, yet there's a manifestation that's happening because maybe you're not fully being able to process through that, right? Especially as a child, right? It's like we all have these little micro experiences or big experiences that affect, you know, how we think and feel.
yes.
So if you're willing to talk about that, I think it would be great. And if you want to talk about some of those traumas ahead of time, which I know you have been public about, just for those of you who don't know, you're welcome to. So however it feels good to you.
Okay. I went through a lot in childhood, which, you know, it's like we all have these things that we grow up with. I mean, there's nobody walking around that doesn't have some type of childhood trauma, no matter what it is. I had a lot of like family things that popped up that kind of, I guess, like left me to deal with them at a very young age alone, and also taking care of the adults, which should have been taking care of me, but for various reasons couldn't at that point. And so not having the emotional support, I guess, and then going through this trauma, I became quite depressed in high school to the point where I just didn't really understand what was even happening to me. And as a result of that depression, I developed anorexia. And I have not ever been outspoken about this because, I mean, I had to tell my daughter about this 2 days ago because she didn't know, she didn't even know, because it's not part of, I mean, it's part of my story, but it's not part of who I am now. So it just feels so far in the past, but there's a shame. Like, I was thinking about it because, you know, she sent me some questions to mull over, and I'm like, oh, well, why have I been resistant to sharing this? And I felt shame come up, and I'm like, well, why am I ashamed of this? This is just something that I beat. Like, I should be proud of myself, but instead I felt this shame, and I think it was because it was like in our society, like, you know, like it's kind of attached to this body, like, well, very, like, it seems like a like superficial, like, body image type thing. For me, it was like everything that I had gone through in my childhood came out sideways in this eating disorder. Like, that's how somehow I found this coping mechanism, which was not healthy, but, you know, there's many of those. I mean, alcohol, like, you name it, you know, and mine was just this eating disorder. So as a senior in high school, I was hospitalized for most of the year, and I was in and out of the hospital because the insurance would basically be like, oh, okay, well, we see that you're getting better, so now you have to go home. And then like a week later, I would go back. And so I spent much of my senior year in and out of this hospital, and seeing these patients who, you know, some were in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, these women, and they had spent their lives doing this. And to recover from an eating disorder is incredibly complicated. There's so much connected to it, and even more than I can ever articulate or understand myself. But I do know that I was in my senior year, and I heard this therapist say in the beginning that once you have an eating disorder, you always have an eating disorder. It's like being an alcoholic. You could give up drinking, but you're always going to be an alcoholic. And I was just like, I don't accept that. I don't want an eating disorder forever. That's why I'm here. Like, I am here to not have this anymore, you know, and also I was being forced to be there. But, you know, like, I just was like, I don't accept that. And I looked around the room, and all of the other patients were just like, okay. And I'm like, no, you know? And so, again, I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the tools to get myself out of this, and it was scary, and it becomes a part of your identity, and so I was just like in it for a while, and then finally I went back and I was really upset that I was missing photography class. So I was just like, well, I can't, I'm not in school and I can't be in photography. And I went, and there's a group counseling session that we had to go to, and this therapist just looks around the room at all the patients, and she goes, so I have a challenge. I've only done this challenge, well, only one person has taken me up on this challenge in 20 years, and they're fully recovered. And so my ears, because I'm motivated, here's challenge, and I'm like, excuse me, challenge? You know, and everybody else is like, whatever. And I'm like, what is it? And she said, eat normally for 6 months, and if you find at the end of 6 months that your life is better, you feel healthier, you're happy, then keep going. If you hate where you are, if you hate who you are, if you feel horrible, by all means, go back to this. And so I was like, challenge accepted. And she didn't believe me, but I was discharged within a week after that, because I sat down and every day I made the commitment to myself. And I know that people who do not know about eating disorders won't really understand this, but I chose every scary food on that menu and I ate it. And I also brought my film camera, because it was pre-digital, set it on the table for every meal, and I wrote a note card to myself, and I said, I want to be a photographer when I grow up. And I am, which is weird. And I don't have an eating disorder. And I recovered fully, and it's like part of my story, but it's not part of my identity anymore. So sometimes it's like, I totally forget, you know, that it's even there, but I do know that it's like, I was able to tell that therapist, and she said, now I've had two people who took me up on this challenge that are recovered. And so, I don't know, I think that's the drive, the motivation, the like not giving up, not resigning yourself to say, all right, well, I guess I'm just going to be stuck here because, you know, it's too hard to get my way. It was a hard fight. It wasn't easy, but that's life, really. So,
yeah,
that's my story.
So, do you think that resiliency is also understanding that things happen to you, but it doesn't have to define you? Because I feel like often we get these labels and we feel like we're stuck with them, or we have to stay in this box, and now we must think and move in the world as from this box, right?
Yeah.
And I'm hearing you say you did the opposite.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's worked really well for you.
Yeah, I think so. Wait, what's my question?
So, do you think that you can have things happen to you, but not let it define you?
100%. The only person that defines me is me. I don't do labels. And also, like, everything in life is a choice. Like, I mean, you can choose to stay stuck in a certain place because it might be easier or too scary to climb your way out of it. But, like, I guess I'm a little bit of the unusual person where I'm always like, I'm like, oh, that's a fight, so that's worth it, and I'm gonna do it, you know, and I don't know how, and you can't be afraid of failure, you know, that's like a huge thing, because like, how many times have I failed before I actually succeeded, you know, but failure is when you learn, and you're like, oh, now I know how to get to there, you know, because I failed and I learned that, and it, you know, and I feel like life is just going to be a constant, like, failure, succeed, and but you can't get bogged down by that failure bit or scared, you know, like, that's like the best learning tool that you could ever have in your life, or at least I think so.
Yeah. So clearly you have intrinsically motivation, but not everybody does, right? So you and I talked about this. Do you think that resiliency can be a learned skill or habit?
I'd like to think so. I think so. I think that, you know, you just have to be committed to being open to a different experience, to be not afraid of failure, to work really hard and not be afraid that that work that you put in is not going to get you anywhere. And yeah, I think that, you know, like, I make choices every day, and I never know if they're like, is this going to be, I hope this is the choice that I feel like my intuition tells me is right, but sometimes it doesn't always work out, you know? Yeah. But I think, you know, knowing that you have that choice is really important, and everybody has a choice, you know, and you might not be born with the crazy motivation that I was for some odd reason, but like, you know, we all experience these hardships, and we can all get ourselves out of them, and we don't have to dwell in that, I think, is important.
Yeah. I would say I've learned resiliency because I am a perfectionist to the point of like not doing things typically. But I just got to a point in my life where I was like, I could see the window closing. Like I'm wasting so much time not doing things and being afraid to do things that I just had to kind of force myself. And like you said, I've failed a lot and picked myself back up. But every time I do that, it builds more and more resiliency so that I feel more comfortable challenging myself, putting myself out there, because I realize I have my own back. And that's something we talked about a lot too. It's like we're all looking for everything outside of ourselves, but it's really inside of you, right? So resiliency is really working on the inside.
Yeah.
So I know you have some great thoughts on that, but also what I was thinking too when we were talking was about asking for help.
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you think being resilient requires asking for help sometimes?
Yes, that is something I'm not good at. I'm learning to get better. I think because of my childhood trauma, it's like I depend on myself. I can only depend on myself, and I was thinking last week, I was like going over this in my head, and I'm like, the only thing in life that you can count on is that you can't count on anything. And I have functioned that way in my life as a result of kind of what I went through in my childhood, of just like, it's just me. I can only count on me. And it's like, I think that also resiliency that you develop through like these traumas and stuff, it goes both ways. There are all these positive outcomes, like you get strength and you can get through things. But then you have these like, kind of coping mechanisms that might not be super relevant to where you are in your life now, but you're just like so used to them that it's like, I'm really stubborn. I can do it myself. Like I can count on myself. I don't need to count on anybody else, but I know that doesn't serve me anymore. And so I have been trying to shed these things, but I think that asking for help is very helpful. And the way that I do that actually is by asking for feedback from people. So I'll be going through something and it's like, okay, well, I processed it this far. What do you think about this? And I'll bounce ideas off. And so that's how I ask for help. I'm sure everyone has a different, way of asking for help, but it's something that I need to work more on as I get older. Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
I hope so.
So, not everybody here is familiar with your story. You have suffered some terrible losses, and you had some really unique ways of dealing with that I think are just incredible testaments to your strength, your willpower, your motivation to live well. So if you're willing, it'd be great if you could talk about that.
I'm assuming you need my sons.
Yes.
Okay, so for those who don't know, I had a stillbirth October of 2020, and then lost a late second trimester, another boy, so two boys shortly after that, so actually May of last year. And I have a 15-year-old daughter. Hi, Lizzie. I hope you're watching. I told you should, and I told you I'd call you out. Anyway, so I have this daughter who's 15, and then I unexpectedly got pregnant when I had to wrap my head around that whole process, and I really got on board. And it's like you just don't know that. I was not aware. I was not aware that things can go wrong. I mean, you get past the 20-week ultrasound, and they're like, everything's fine. It looks perfect. So it's like, okay. And then one day my son stopped kicking, and then he didn't kick again, and days went by, and I kept calling, and they were like, oh, it's fine, you just had an ultrasound. I was like, okay. And then I ended up in the labor and delivery to do a stress check on the weekend, and they hooked me up to a monitor, and for 30 minutes said they found his heartbeat, and I was like, whew. So I texted everybody. I'm like, okay, good. And then they were like, okay, we're going to send you down to ultrasound just to see why you're not feeling him. And I was like, okay. So I walk into the ultrasound, and the woman's like, did you find his heartbeat? And I said, yes. And she just literally sigh of relief. Okay, good, you know. And then as soon as she put that thing on my stomach, she just said, "I'm really sorry, your son's gone." And I'm like, gone. Like you go into such shock. I was in such shock. I basically, like, I feel like I was floating above my body, looking down on it. I've never experienced anything like this before. It is the most horrific thing that a woman can go through. I mean, I've been through a lot. I'm not saying that, like, there's a lot worse that can happen, but this, by far, was the most traumatic experience of my life. And then, you know, you're sitting there in shock, and I'm like, oh, well, there's a magical way that you're just going to get this baby out of me, right? Like you just... It's just like, is there like a pill? Like, it just, like, what happens? And she's like, oh no, we're sending you up to labor and delivery and we're going to induce you. So I spent the next, 18 hours in labor. It was like, they induced me at 11 a.m. on a 10 or 11 on a Saturday. I gave birth to him 8 a.m. on the dot Sunday. And it's just this very surreal experience to go through that after already having a child and going through the same exact process of okay, this is like incredibly painful. But I didn't have any emotional strength to draw upon because I wasn't like, I'm going to hold my son and I'm going to take him home. All of a sudden I was gone. And I was just like, how do I even do this? And I remember for the first time in my life, I looked at the doctor and I said, I can't do this. I cannot do this. Like, it's just, and then they were like, oh, would you like a drug? And I'm like, yes, like, why wasn't hello, I'm in labor, birthing. So, it's just like, out of that, I had really in my life, like, experienced grief in different ways of, like, losing certain things or, like, people, whatever. But then this happened and this grief hit so incredibly strongly in a way that it was such a blur. I couldn't eat. I wasn't sleeping. But I remember thinking, and grief is a funny thing where you go through all of these stages, but they're not like stages like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, you got number 1 out of the way, and now you're on to number 2. It's like, it's just a jumble. Like, you jump from 5 to 2 to 6 to 1. And like, some days I was so depressed I couldn't get out of bed. The next day I was angry for no reason. I was angry, and you just like, you go through these emotions. And I think that is a really, really important part of resiliency, is accepting however you feel. Don't be afraid to be super depressed one day and not want to get out of bed. Don't be afraid to be angry. Like, you have to sit in those uncomfortable places and those emotions in order to move through them. And I knew this, and I said, Erin, let yourself feel it all. If you don't, then you are going to be carrying this for a long time. It's going to come out sideways, like an eating disorder. I don't think that's how, but I have no idea. Yep. And so I just allowed myself to sit in these very uncomfortable places for months. Days went by, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get better. This could be my life. I was afraid that I was like never going to recover from this. And then slowly, you start to kind of like see the light again. It was like, I literally, that time period of months after that, I just remember as complete darkness. Like, I don't remember the sun shining. I don't remember anything. I just remember this horrible time where like I was like basically suicidal. I've never been so low in my life, but I allowed myself to be there. And then out of that came this strength of like, wow, like I got through that. And you have such like, you're proud of yourself, and you have so much more faith in yourself going forward to like, like go through other things in life. Like when I was confronted with like, you might have cancer, it was like, well, I did that, so I can do this, But I was open about it because on social media, so I'm on Instagram, Erin Little Photo, and I try to be very authentic and genuine, but obviously you don't share everything about your life because some moments are private, so, but like I try to be as real as possible. And I started writing about this, and I gave birth to this beautiful, perfect little boy, and I was like, all these other mothers get to post about their babies. Like, I went through the same exact thing. Why can't I not? And so I told his birth story, and it made me feel so good to know that he was out there, that people knew about Henry, my son. And so, like, out of that came this connection with women who, like, some of them were messaging me saying, I had a stillbirth 20 years ago, I've never told anybody. I don't know how to talk about it. You've put my feelings into words, and it helped me heal. And, like, that's kind of why I share stuff like that. But So, I mean, I guess the moral of the story is, like, don't be afraid to sit in really uncomfortable places, because that's life.
Yeah, I think when you can learn to sit in those uncomfortable places, it is so empowering. And it's hard because we live in a society that's like, there's something to drink, there's something to eat, there's something to smoke, you can buy it, binge watch this, and you don't have to feel anything, right? But what happens is then you get stuck in that cycle of never progressing forward and never really building the confidence that you're capable of building. So I think that is such a perfect example. I have never experienced anything like that in my life, and I hope I never do. But I recently chose sobriety for that reason, because I was raised to be a number. Numb it out, right? Just eat something tasty if you're having a bad feeling. And I eventually became just like an over-exerciser. And same thing though, I'm still running from my feelings. And then, you know, it's like cocktails with the friends, and I just finally was like, I have to sit in it. And I want to be there for all of it, because sometimes it's the ultimate high, right? Totally. So it's like life is ups and downs, and we have to, because sometimes it's hard to sit in the high, right? Because we're always like, wait a minute, this is too good, yeah, this is going to end. So I think it's so powerful, because I think also too, we're almost more afraid of experiencing the emotions than the emotions are actually that bad, you know? So great. Yeah. That gave me chills. You're incredible.
Oh, thanks.
So I'm gonna keep going with the social media piece here.
Yes. Go for it.
So
I'm gonna take a sip of wine.
Yes.
Do that.
Oh, I'll have my time again someday. So with social media, what do you think? Or let me think of this much better. Okay, so how do you think this perfection that's portrayed in social media affects our ability to be resilient?
Really putting me on the spot
Yeah.
here. Oh, perfection, resiliency. Well, I mean, I think like it's what I talked about, you know, previously with the doubting yourself. You know, if you're constantly in this state of comparison, and what's also been really important to me in my life is I don't compare myself to anybody else but myself from the day before. So every morning I wake up and I'm like, how am I going to be better today? Like, you know, like I don't compare myself to other people, and I've never been that type of person. I don't know why, but I always am to myself. It's just like, but I think that, you know, comparing yourself to this false reality constantly is certainly going to keep you in this place of just, you're like, I can't think of anything more depressing, you know, honestly, of thinking that somehow you're a failure or that you're doing something wrong because everyone else looks like that. You know, everyone else's life looks perfect, or, you know, whatever it is, and it's just this curated perfection. Sometimes the perfection isn't even real. Sometimes it totally is. Like, I've had days where I'm like, oh my God, I totally want to share this because it's so wonderful and perfect, you know? But, like, there's this kind of, like, culture now of just, like, creating that, and it's not even genuine. And I think that it literally brings other people down, I think, especially if you're struggling. Like, if you're on a high and you're like, oh my God, I love my life right now. Like, who cares? Like, you're just like, oh, that's so pretty. Like, you know. Right. But if you're in a really hard, dark place that you're trying to climb out of, I don't think that that's going to be very beneficial to you. And so I think that, you know, that sharing struggles, allowing that human connection, when you, like, I know that I look for people who are genuine and share vulnerable moments, because then I say, oh, I've been through that, and I didn't really know how to get myself out of it, but this person is sharing, like, and so that, like, motivates me and gives me hope that, like, while they did it, I can do it too. And so that's why I think that that's really important.
Yeah. You and I talked about too, you almost until you share, you don't know that anybody else has been through it. So you might be like feeling really alone, and then you confide in someone, and they're like, oh yeah, me too, or my brother-in-law, or whatever it is. And so I just feel like the world would be so much better if we were more open and vulnerable, because you also give people permission to do the same, which is so cool, right? Like, you gave people who had bottled up all of this permission to figure it out, right? It doesn't have to look the same way that you did it, but it's just like, okay, like there is life on the other side of this.
Yeah.
So let me look at the time here. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. I'd like to open it up to the floor if anybody has questions for Erin.
Maybe I answered them all. Oh, no, I don't know if any are on Zoom or.
Oh yeah. Tim, do you mind?
Oh, wait. Used to be on live. I forgot to set that up.
I think I have it right here. Nope.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for being here, everyone. Come on, Matt. I know you have one.
Do you have
1660? I forget.
Did you see one, Tim?
Yeah.
June 16th.
Do you have any advice for young folks who might not know what resilience is?
Oh. Advice for young folks that don't know what resiliency is. So, I feel really bad for like my daughter's generation growing up, thinking everything is social media. So we just talked about that, and it's just creating kind of like almost like a false identity sometimes. And so getting to really know who they are as an individual and not being afraid of that instead of trying to follow some mold of like, now, it used to be one thing when we were in school, and it was just like, oh, there are all these trends, and I have to fit in, but now it's just like everywhere. And so you lose sight of who you are on a very deep level, and especially at that age of like, that you're building the foundation of yourself, and it's so important to be just so genuine and know who you are, and resiliency is just, life is hard, there's ups and downs, and resiliency is just your capacity to get past those down places, without hopefully a whole lot of effort, but knowing that you can. So, and I think that probably kids these days, and I'm only speaking as a 38-year-old woman, so I don't know, but I do have a teenager, but like, I can only imagine that what they're surrounded with, if they have a hard day, then they feel like a failure, but that's just part of life, that's totally normal. So I hope that answered your question, whoever that was, accurately.
Well, I feel like too, so we're both mothers, and so we've chatted about parenting and those type of things too, and I know that you mentioned like really knowing yourself and being able to trust yourself and how powerful that is for you. And I think when you're young and you are like, you just want to fit in, you want to belong, like you said, you kind of lose yourself. So really like taking the time, you take a lot of time sitting with yourself and your thoughts and your feelings and your actions and really analyzing them. And I think that comes with age naturally, but I wish that when I was younger, someone had said like, keep journaling, right? Because I had a diary, like the cute little fluffy one, but like keep writing it.
Do a little key too.
Yes. Because I think that's so essential too. It's just like pulling back every once in a while and thinking about who you are and are you behaving in a way that's true to yourself, right? And you're so good at that. You really are.
Thank you.
Do you want to say something?
Oh,
I was going to follow up on that by saying, what kind of practices would you suggest for someone who wanted to cultivate more resiliency? Should you journal, I'm trying to think of other things you could do. Read more fiction to gain more compassion with other people. I don't know. I mean, what would you suggest for sort of daily practice?
Such a good question, Leah. Thank you. So the question was, what can you do to cultivate more resiliency in your life? So this is something that I've also contemplated, like how much is nature versus nurture? I think I was born with a certain amount of this that I don't have to think about it. But then all of these life, situations kind of made me even more. But again, when you're a kid, you're not thinking about it, right? You're just like living your life and doing what you need to do to survive. As an adult, though, I think that some of the things that in the past, or even in now, in present time, have helped is gratitude. I know that sounds so silly, but in the darkest moments of my life, I've force myself, even though I'm like, oh, and I might like write it in my journal, I'm like, I don't want to do this, but I force myself, and I've done this for years, to write 5 things that I'm grateful for every day. Even when I was in all that grief. That was hard. That was really hard. But what that does, it doesn't allow you to stay in that space, you know, of just like, oh, my life is so horrible right now. Like, I don't think I can get out of that. So gratitude, practicing gratitude, and it does sound so silly because you hear it like it's so self-helpy and like all that stuff, but it actually, I feel like it really rewires your brain to a certain extent over time. So it's much more easy, you know, to like pick that gratitude out, even if you're having the worst day of your life. You know, I always try to find something I'm grateful for. So I think that's really important. And then, you know, the other thing about just like the self-awareness, that's really a common characteristic of resilient people, and holding yourself accountable. Like, I do journal, like, and that's something I've done for years, and I have all of my journals cataloged on my desk, and I can easily, like, last week I was drawing from ones that I had written in 8 years ago, to be like, okay, well, where was I then? And I'm holding myself accountable to those things that I said I was going to change, or I wanted to change. Where am I now? Some of them are the same, which is like, I'm like, oh, ding, 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 okay, this is something I need to work on. And some of them are vastly different. And then I'm like, oh, pat on the back, Erin, you did it. Like, good for you. You know, but just like, I think that, you know, getting your thoughts out there, getting your struggles, getting your joys, your triumphs, like all of that stuff, and being able to kind of reflect back on that is really helpful for moving forward in the future, because we all make mistakes. We want to move forward in a different way, you know, and to me, the only way that I can do that is to take a look at it, dissect it, figure out what didn't work for me, and then be like, okay, well, I'm going to choose something different this time. So, does that work?
That's awesome. What's your favorite color, though?
I don't have one. I really don't. I guess gray, green, blue. I told her to ask me that if nobody asked the question. And then I was like, wait a second, I don't know the answer. But thank you. Yes?
And one of your Instagram followers, Wildflower Musings, who you may
Hi.
know, she's asking, how do you have resiliency after the end of a relationship? Because you always seem to keep on going no matter what. Well,
everyone wanted to know if I was still with the person that I was with. It was really funny. I think that's that self-awareness piece. So throughout, and it's a complicated story, and I don't want to get into it, but like, you just have to make decisions. It's like that, holding yourself accountable. Is this choice going to hurt or better my life? Like, is this going to harm me, or is this going to be a positive thing that I'm choosing? And sometimes they can look differently, but knowing that I did my best, I held myself accountable for my actions, how I was in the relationship, and I was like, okay, like, this is not working. This is not working, and I don't deserve this, so, like, I'm going to choose something different. And I think that when you go into it fully accountable and I don't have any regrets in any way, but I'm very happy now to be on the other side. And so I know I made the right choice. It's a sad thing. It is for everybody when that happens, but I hope that answered the question. So it's just not dwelling in that, and I think like in my particular circumstances, I had processed so much during it that once it was over, I felt good and back to myself. That is helpful.
So I feel like what I'm hearing you say is like being clear on why it ended, and being truthful about why it ended. Okay. And I also think too, I was just thinking, you're also really good at accepting the bad feelings that come with it, right? Because I think what we want to know is, how can we have a breakup and not feel any pain? That's just not part of the process. Like, part of the process is the grief, is the pain, is the loneliness, right? Yeah. So giving yourself permission to just feel the feels and journal it out, spend time with friends, all the things that you do.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier about asking for help. I think as a norm, and especially with women, but just in general, it's very hard to ask for help. With with your circumstances and at what point did you seek help, and how did that work for you?
Like, seek help in what part of my life?
Well, it can
Any
either
part?
be like therapist, or like when you've actually had so you've talked a lot about how you filtered and handled these situations,
Mhm.
but did you at any point reach out for help to support you going through these things?
Oh,
Because I think that's something that we don't talk about. We don't like to say that we had to ask for help because we
Gotcha.
want to be strong.
I see.
But how did
understand.
you find that experience, if you did?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, asking for help, like, you don't think about that because you're a kid, or at least I was just like, well,
You internalize it.
yeah, but because I was hospitalized for the eating disorder, out of that came therapy. So like once I was discharged, finally, I had outpatient care, and I had to go to a dietitian and get weighed every week and do the whole thing, and out of that came therapy. And there was a lot of therapy and that's my first experience with it. And I'm like 100% like, therapy is great. Like, why don't like people? Why are people ashamed of that? It's like, look, like we all raised our hands. We all have trauma. We all go through stuff. I think of it as like, oh, I go to the gym, I work out, I eat well. Like, I do things that enrich my life and my soul. Why wouldn't I take care of my mental health and my emotional health too? Like, to me, it's a no-brainer. I just have been doing it forever. But, certainly as an adult, in certain situations, there'll be like, gaps where I don't go for a year or two or whatever, and then I go through something, I'm like, you know what? It's kind of like asking your friends their opinion. Like, this is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on. Am I handling this okay? Like, therapy for me is another form of accountability, of just like somebody's like showing up and they're telling me like, well, okay, like let's look at this another way. And plus, I love learning about myself and like my flaws. I'm not afraid to know that I have flaws or for somebody to point them out. I'm like, oh, thank you. Because if I deal with this, then maybe all this other crap will go away. I did not swear. I almost swore that I said crap. I think that's probably like it's a very comfortable thing for me to ask for help in that way. And thank you for pointing that out, because I wouldn't have considered that. Was that a good answer?
Yeah.
Did it fully answer your question?
Anytime anybody's open to talk about asking or being even regular with it, or knowing that they should ask, I think it's something that as humans we should talk about more.
Totally. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of this translates to being a creative small business owner? I mean, obviously it does, but are there any other unique things being an entrepreneur that targets that resiliency?
Yeah, so how does resiliency play into being a
is there anything else unique above and beyond what you've discussed that helps you?
With my business,
Yeah.
in particular, I think it's that like you don't accept failure. It's just like, oh, that didn't work. Well, I'm going to try this way, And it's just like my business has been, I've been building it for 15 years, and certainly like as a single mom to a very small child, in the beginning was really hard, and I didn't know what I was doing. Like I'm self-taught, like all of this stuff, and I think that drive, that motivation to just be like, well, I'm going to set my mind to this, and this is what I'm going to do, and I will figure out the way to get where I want to be, just organically. Like nobody's ever laid anything out for me, being like, oh well, here are the steps to be a successful business owner, and it was like trial and error. Like, oh, that didn't work, but maybe I'll try this one, and that'll get me to where I want to go. And I still am learning constantly, and I'm far away from where I want to be someday. But I have stopped fighting that. That was something that I fought for years. Like, no, I should be, there's people on Instagram who pick up a camera and they're 21 years old and they're famous, And I'm like, I'm a failure. But then I'm like, no, Erin, it's a slow and steady climb. Like, you're doing it differently, and just honor that and it'll be fine, And I think that, resiliency in terms of that is just like, I take the same mentality of like working through, hard stuff in life, and I put it towards my business. There have been major financial blows with my business that I'm just like, and you just have to recover from them, and you can't let it like make you quit. Like, I don't accept failure. Quitting is not a word in my vocabulary. So it's just kind of like that constant like, okay, we've got this. I got this. Like, don't doubt yourself too much. I sometimes go through periods where it's like, I hate everything that I do in my work. Like, I'm just not happy with it, but I, just like grief, allow myself to be there, because out of that, you know, it's like, I'm thinking of the COVID numbers where they like go like this. You know, like you're down in that valley and you're just like questioning everything and you're doubting yourself and you hate your work and you hate, you know, like it's all that stuff. And then out of that, I sit in that for sometimes weeks, and it's so uncomfortable. And then all of a sudden it's just like whoosh, and I get this idea, or something happens, or, you know, and then it just like propels me forward to the next kind of level that I'm like, oh, well, that's cool, you know. And I think riding those waves and just letting yourself be at the highest of highs and lowest of lows is a really good learning experience in and of itself. But I feel like, yeah, resiliency, it's like across the board, whether you're dealing with grief or your business. Like, I mean, it's just, it's very similar. So, good question.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Every time that you speak, I just keep hearing like how much you trust yourself, which I think that a lot of us just struggle with that. Like, you trust yourself, you trust the process, you trust that whatever you're going through is just part of the journey to get to the other side. So that's my takeaway. That's what I feel we're working on.
Yeah. Anyone? Matt?
How many times am I in your top 5 of gratitude lists? And also, what do you think you're giving Lizzie in terms of resiliency and like in teaching her, and like where do you see that little relationship?
Thank you. It's a good question. So the question, who couldn't hear Matt, was like, how is this, my resiliency basically affecting my daughter, or how is she experiencing that? And we talked a bit about parenting, and I feel like I'm a very non-American parent, for lack of a better word. My daughter is an incredibly mature, amazing, sorry Lizzie, she's gonna hate that I'm doing this, person who I have not shielded her from life. Like, my life hasn't been perfect. Nobody's life is perfect. I've been through breakups, you know, like, we've lost a house. Like, there are all these things that happen. We lived in an office for a year without a bathroom or a kitchen, you know, because I couldn't afford I couldn't afford an apartment. So she has seen all of these things, and I wish that well, I'm glad she's not here right now, because she would be like, come on up and tell him. But I've been so honest and open with her, while also being incredibly, what I hope, supportive. But that truth and that honesty of not shielding her from, like, this is life. We'll get through this. We will do this together. And if you have any problems, come to me. If you have any questions, come to me. I will answer them. And I think that out of that, like, if I could have been her at 15, like, I am constantly amazed by her. Like, the maturity that she has, the self-awareness that she has, where I was honestly, like, at 15, I was like, oh, I don't know who I am. And, like, you know, it's like, and she just has such a solid footing on her. And I hope, I mean, I think, obviously, maybe that's just who she is, but I think that because, you know, she's seen me struggle, and I've been open with her, and I haven't shielded her from that. I think a lot of parents would probably be like, "Oh, I don't want my kids to know that this is happening right now, because, you know, it's gonna be so hard for them." And I'm like, no, like, I feel like my one job as a parent is to produce a healthy human adult that's capable of getting through the ups and downs of life. That's a nice, kind, compassionate, empathetic person. That is my job. Like, you know, it's like, I'm not here to shield her from life. I'm here to show her how to get through life, you know, so that she can go off and live life on her own. I also just realized that I talk a lot with my left arm. But I think, you know, like, that's just kind of how I've approached it. I had her at 22, totally was ready for a baby, loved having a baby. But I think because of my age, and because I was also building myself in my career, I raised her in a very different way that felt very organic and good to me. And so I'm very proud of you, Lizzie. Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
We all know that social media is such a complex presence in our lives. And I wondered if you could talk about what your defense is when you do come across the post that triggers anxiety or depression or feeling, and if you have any tactics to share with us.
Oh, okay, so what do I do when I come across a post that triggers anxiety for me? I've never experienced that. And I think that that's one of those things that people, I can only speak from my experience of being very open and honest, and there's some people that will read that and be like very touched or connect with that, and then some people cannot deal. They just can't go there. And I know that pregnancy loss and all of that stuff I think was very triggering for people, and I can totally like imagine how that's really hard to stumble upon. But I think of everything as a learning experience. So if I think that being triggered, like, I was actually talking to my therapist about this today. I'm not easily triggered, but I have like one trigger right now, and it's ultrasounds, because that's where I found out that both of my boys were dead. And I had to be in an ultrasound last week for this biopsy for the cancer thing, and that was, despite the pain of the biopsy, the ultrasound was the worst, because I started shaking. I couldn't, and I was like trying, but I like calmed myself. I started talking to myself, Erin, this is very different. Like, this is not the same thing. You're okay. Look around you. You're okay. Nothing is bad. Like, right now, you're taken care of, and so, like, to me, that's like a trigger that I can relate to. But with social media, I don't really get triggered by things. I wish I had a better answer for you. I find honesty and vulnerability very courageous. Like, after I lost my son, there were, who's that famous woman who was on Instagram, Chrissy, is it Teigen? Is that how you say her name? So she had a loss, like, just a couple weeks before mine, and she was constantly posting about it. And it helped me. Like, I related to it, and I know that I've talked to a lot of women who have gone through stillbirth, and they're so triggered. They're triggered, they can't see a baby, they can't, it's very, very hard. And for me, I kind of like immersed myself in it, because I was like, I know that this is life, and I want to, like, get through this. And also seeing other things. I mean, was it really hard to see pregnant women on Instagram having these perfect pregnancies? Yes. That, I guess, I have been triggered. That was triggering. That was a little triggering, and I felt angry. I was like, why not me? Why couldn't that have happened to me? But I forced myself through them. I didn't unfollow. I continued, and it's almost like, there's like a scientific method of like consistently kind of like throwing something at you so that it's like desensitization. Something like that, where it's just like over time I watched, or I felt my anger turn to joy. Look at them. They get to have a baby. Like, how great is that for them? Like, I'm so happy for them. So it's like, it's almost like sitting in that uncomfortable place where you just have to be there, but you don't have to be there forever. And it's interesting what I think your body and mind does, like, organically to ride through that. Like, sometimes you don't even have to do anything. It just happens, and you get to the other side. So
I think it's what you said earlier too about sitting with it instead of running from it. And so, like, why do I feel this way? Why does this particular picture make me feel this way? And then just like digging into the truth, because we all know people who are experiencing things in their personal life but are posting beautiful pictures on social media. So I love those people, but I also use them as my example, like, this is not real, right? And I follow lots of women who are like showing what people do to fake these photos and to fake these videos and whatnot. And
those are really funny.
Yeah,
I love those.
Yeah. So it is 6:38. We're just a little bit past. I saw Tom creeping over here.
My question was answered over there. Was asked over there.
Oh, that's great.
Photography, how that.
Oh, yay. Oh, good. Next one. That's good.
Because you have a house and a kid, and you support your whole life on photography. That's
I know, it's weird, right?
That's fucking best.
Thank you for saying that.
Are you a photographer as well?
Oh no.
Okay.
He's an amazing artist.
I will not dabble in that.
I didn't check my feed, but I'm sure we're out of time. You're like, hello.
Yeah.
Wrap it up, ladies.
No, I just want to give you a hug.
Thank
you. My wife and I had a stillbirth, Timmy.
Oh, I'm sorry. You don't forget, right?
No. And part of what this organization is all about is a lot of what you talked about, which is nature versus nurture. You know, we don't understand nature, most of us. And we oftentimes then resort to nurture. Nurture is like, I understand my story. And you can look back at your story and you can tell your story over and over and over again to the detriment of what you actually want your story to be in the future. And so part of what the Currency Institute is really all about is helping people understand that it's not just denying yourself that helps you go forward, it's knowing yourself. And so it is understanding, getting underneath the hood, trying to journal and understand who you are, how you make decisions to trade with the world to get the things that you want. And we have discovered all kinds of tools over the last 50 years. How many of you have ever taken the Myers-Briggs? How many of you are introverts? In the book Sapiens, they talk about research that shows once you understand you're an introvert, you don't have to be one. You don't have to buy into the label of introvert. And so it's really important that in the message that's been delivered tonight, that you understand that resiliency is part of your story, but the other part of it is really sitting in those hard places to understand who are you and who do you want to be, not just keep telling yourself the story. Don't relive the traumas, so to speak. And so I really want to thank Kelly and Erin for what they've shared with us this evening, because what you hopefully are taking away from this is that life is difficult. M. Scott Peck in his book, The Road Less Traveled, that was how it opened up. Life is difficult. But once you accept that life is difficult, it ceases to be difficult, because that's just life. And the only way you're going to enjoy life is to, ride those ups and downs in a way that turns them into lefts and rights. That's how we go forward, is not dwelling in the downs or trying to hold on to the ups, but recognizing that those ups and downs are really nothing more than I've gone off to the left, I need to correct my course and come back to the right. I thank you guys all for coming to our space, allowing us to bring the idea of resiliency through Erin to you guys in a way that hopefully touches some part of your heart, some way that you can be motivated to overcome something, turn around, and accomplish something else that's really important to you, that's part of why you're on this planet, is to bring your gifts and your talents into the world every single day. With everything that's going on out there, COVID, war in Ukraine, get focused on becoming the best possible version of yourself, because that's how we lift everything up to a new level. I was inspired by what Erin had to say, and every what days? Tuesdays and Thursdays. I get inspired by what she's making us. So I thank you all for coming. Please help yourself to refreshments, food, mingle for a little bit, and just share what you learned with each other in the event that we just had this evening. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.